At the end of last year, the ASX finally decided to do something about the gender imbalance in Australia's boardrooms by requiring companies to have a diversity policy in place and to report on how they were going with it in their annual reports. It wasn't a surprising response, given a 2009 study found that amongst the top 200 companies, only 5% of new directorships were given to women. It was even worse in smaller companies. Well, things are changing. Figures released this week show that women now make up 10% of Australian company directors. Neil Woolrich reports.
It's been a familiar sight over the years, company directors fronting shareholders where the only hint of diversity has been in the colour of their shirts and ties.
You ought to be ashamed to treat me the way you do.
Discrimination is a strong word. I think culturally in this country we've had an issue with monocultural boards, or boards that are homogeneous and just have all men.
You ought to be ashamed.
But today there are growing signs the Boys Club is finally opening up. This year, more than a quarter of board vacancies have been filled by women. 10% of directors in Australia's top 200 listed companies are now female, compared to 8% at the end of 2009.
When I leave you with a no woman blue.
It's a good milestone to get through to double digits, but it's nowhere near good enough. And my biggest fear about the 10% figure is that if we celebrate too hard on that, we're forgetting that we're just not using 50% of the talent pool of Australia, where women are over 50% of the population.
You told me to go out and work.
And I must say that with the exception of a few very enlightened chairmen, the majority are yet to take the necessary action to get sufficient numbers of women on their boards to make their boards look like the society in which they operate.
A major catalyst for change has been the Australian Securities Exchange's diversity guidelines. They require companies to adopt a diversity policy for its board and senior management, and if the company doesn't comply, to explain why not. The Australian Institute of Company Directors has also implemented a mentoring program where experienced chairmen guide a group of aspiring female directors.
What the chairmen are all trying to do is to facilitate the movement of these women from what we would regard as board ready onto boards, onto ASX 200 and other boards.
At this point in time, they're making certainly progress, but it clearly isn't an adequate number, as you think. Still, half of the ASX 200 companies don't have a woman on their board. And we at Women on Boards are of the view that they should be aiming for a target of 25% of women directors by 2012 and 40% by 2015.
And while results to date still lag well behind those targets, it seems fixed quotas are off the agenda, at least for now.
I think if we start setting too many numbers, we'll get caught up in the numbers themselves rather than the culture of change required to ensure that we see women as the equal of any man for a board position, based on merit, based on contribution, based on her history, and that we really should just be seeking out the best talent.
I think we've got to be very careful that we don't use a pneumatic drill to shell a peanut here. I think there have been some significant improvements in terms of statistics. More importantly, we've seen people with diverse backgrounds come onto the boards of public companies and make significant contributions at all levels.
The clothing maker Pacific Brands has a majority of female directors, including its chief executive, Sue Morfitt. But Pacific Brands chairman James McKenzie says there's been no particular affirmative action push.
We've looked at the matrix of experience and needs that we've got for the board to have on board to appropriately discharge our obligations, and it just so happens that on 2 of the last 3 appointments we've made to the board, that the standout candidate in each of the categories that we were looking for were women.
Ruth Mead chairs the Women on Boards organisation, which is trying to match its 9,000 members to suitable vacancies.
We're a country that wishes to grow. We're a country that's experiencing or will experience a skills shortage in the near term. It's a country that underutilises its women workers.
Some have also argued there's a financial advantage in having a more diverse board. One study calculates that companies with female directors have performed at least 10% better than companies without female directors over a 3 or 5 year period. While that doesn't necessarily prove a cause and effect relationship, diversity advocates say that getting the right mix of talent will lead to better results.
There's substantial evidence that a women around the boardroom table will in fact improve the discussion, will in fact cause the company to be more innovative, will cause the company to be more successful, will cause the company to have a longer-term strategic view of its place in the economy.
Now, I'm not saying it's the women arriving that deliver that increase in value and return, but there's no doubt that those boards that embrace diversity build, I think, a capacity to deal with their businesses that builds longer-term value, and that's been demonstrated in these early studies.
Sam Mostyn was appointed to the board of Virgin Blue this week. She says while the new diversity guidelines may raise allegations of tokenism, the female directors she knows will cope well with any detractors.
The fact of the matter is that these women are being put through, I think in many cases, more extreme, more rigorous processes to join boards. So whilst the criticism might be made by those who seek to do that, the women themselves will demonstrate their incredible capacity and their legitimacy on boards, as they do today.
Certainly my experience with our mentees is that there is no shortage of talent. We've got to work harder to make sure we find the individuals who have the skills to contribute around the board table.
However, companies typically only rotate around a third of their board positions each year, and many of those directors return for another term. That means making quick progress on board diversity is going to be practically difficult, even if the willpower is there.
The time is finally